Could this be the end of California as we know it? Maybe. Not only are people fleeing the state, many of these cities, not only are we dealing with a massive economic crisis and a violation of human rights from LA's mayor, Garcetti, who said he's going to shut off your utilities if you peaceably assemble. He said if you had a party, but you get the point. You can assemble for whatever reason you want under the Constitution. He's going to violate your rights. Look, man, I want to empathize with everybody who's still in California, but look at this story. California orders rolling blackouts for up to 250,000 homes and businesses as heat wave grips the state with temperatures hitting 112 degrees and crowds flocking to beaches. I'm sorry, this could be people dying. At a certain point, you've just got to get out of these cities. I mean, the riots are bad enough. The policy mismanagement, bad enough. New York City also facing a mass exodus, 500,000 plus people leaving. Moving companies are booked up completely. I wonder where it is everybody is going. But according to the SF Gate now, San Francisco is experiencing an historic exodus from the city. Housing vacancies are just skyrocketing. But the thing that scared me the most, and we can talk about the horrible policies of California, notably their new wealth tax proposal, which is going to try and tax somebody who left within the past 10 years. I kid you not. You live in California 9 years ago and you leave, they're going to try and file taxes against you. What are you going to do? You're going to send California State Police to New York? That's ridiculous. But that shows you how desperate they've become. And to me, this shows the state is in dire straits. What will this mean moving forward for the elections? I can't tell you, but I can tell you rolling blackouts for those that live there now. In this heat, people could die. Here's a story from Daily Mail. California orders rolling blackouts. They say California utility companies are rolling out a massive blackout across the state that could impact some 250,000 homes and businesses in an effort to curb electricity shortages as more people stay home during the pandemic. Grid managers last implemented such a power cut in 2001 when the state was suffering from an electric crisis. On late Friday, the California Independent System Operator declared a stage 3 emergency, Bloomberg reports. Residents in the state still took to the beach on Friday, however, enjoying the blazing heat. This is good news. I'm glad they're not going to go arrest all of these beachgoers, because if South Pasadena is facing a rolling blackout, well, people need to get out of the heat, and going to the beach could be one way to save them, staying in the water, at least a little bit. CBS Los Angeles reported South Pasadena has gone dark after Cal ISO declared a statewide stage 3 electrical emergency, prompting rolling power outages. Absolutely crazy. They say this comes as residents are forced to spend more time at home during the pandemic and are using their AC units more. Well, they need to. San Joaquin Valley is set to have blazing temperatures of 112 degrees Fahrenheit. Los Angeles is expected to reach 96 degrees. So, okay, not the valley is going to get bad, or one of the valleys. As many as 250,000 homes and businesses served by Pacific Gas and Electric Co. could be impacted by the outage, according to the company. They noted that counterparts in other areas of the state were being directed to take similar actions. The SF Chronicle reports. We can see a bunch of photos. In the San Diego and Southern Orange County areas, Sempra Energy's San Diego Gas and Electric Utility said 1-hour rotating shutoffs will be widespread across its territory. The California ISO is working closely with California utilities and neighboring power systems to manage strain on the grid and to restore the power grid to full capacity, the agency said in a Friday statement. The National Weather Service forecast an extensive heat wave starting this weekend and lasting until late next week. Excessive heat warnings have been issued for much of California for Friday and through Wednesday. Solar generators for the state will also be impacted as cloud cover from Tropical Storm Elita is expected to crimp output. Talk about a perfect storm of just yikes, man. For a lot of reasons, I and many others have been warning you guys got to get out of the big cities. Suburbs aren't necessarily the right answer. And for a lot of people who aren't familiar, LA is basically just one big urban sprawl, but it's not a centralized city like Chicago or New York. It's actually a bunch of smaller cities, and LA proper is relatively small. So when people say Los Angeles, they're typically referring to the county of Los Angeles, which is massive. So I don't know. You do what you got to do, man. But we're seeing people actually heed this warning. The 2020 San Francisco exodus is real, and historic, report shows. Take a look at this. Real estate inventory change from February to July 2020. Los Angeles, the exodus is legit. Okay, we're seeing inventory is increasing, which means people don't live there. The houses are available. We see this in LA and San Francisco. But interestingly, in Boston, in Miami, in Seattle and Washington, it still is relatively low. But there's one thing you can see for everything except Miami. In Boston, vacancy inventory is starting to decrease. In Los Angeles, it absolutely is decreasing. San Francisco, a near 100% increase in inventory and availabilities. Seattle is going up. Washington is going up. People are fleeing cities. That is a fact. And I got to tell you, man, it is absolutely, in my opinion, due to Democratic mismanagement. I had a conversation with a friend of mine in LA, and they said, these Democrat cities, man, what's going on? And I'm like, dude, it's been obvious for a while now, right? I mean, I just covered the riots in Portland, the state police pulling out. I mean, look, man, that should be the most obvious. Take a look at what's going on in Chicago. They raised the bridges. Richmond, Virginia, there were riots there. Did you know that? A lot of people didn't know that. New York put sick people in nursing homes, and that's where a good portion of the deaths came from. This is beyond mismanaged. This is, look, one thing I've been kind of harping on for a bit is that I think the problem is due to the fact that the mainstream media only entertains the left-wing narrative. They never actually have a balanced conversation about what's going on. And social media platforms will ban people who actually challenge the prevailing narrative. And thus, the only thing you will get from these politicians is, if the left wants it, we are pandering to them for re-election, so we will give them this insanity. And there is no plan. There's no real plan. The cities are in free fall, crumbling, and people are dipping out. And we got a big story. How about this one? Joe Rogan leaving Los Angeles for freedom in Texas signals coming exodus from liberal cities. Boy, did they call it. Chuck DeVore. Rogan isn't just griping. His comments are fundamentally a political critique of California's one-party governance by the increasingly far left. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Joe, I got really bad news for you, buddy. Check it out. California wealth tax could become first of its kind in U.S. under new proposal. Talk about horrifying management. They're basically trying to implement a 0.4% wealth tax on anybody who's lived in California for the past 10 years. Even if you leave. Joe, you're leaving LA. It's too late. They're going to try and impose this tax on you. Now, I gotta say, I don't know how you can pull that off. Retroactive tax enforcement? What, are the state troopers gonna show up to Texas and try and hunt Joe down because he's leaving? Take a look at this, and then we'll talk about the exodus from LA with Joe. A group of state lawmakers on Thursday proposed a first-in-the-nation state wealth tax that could hit about 30,400 California residents and raise an estimated $7.5 billion for the general fund. The tax rate would be 0.4% of net worth, excluding directly held real estate that exceeds $30 million for single and joint filers and $15 million for married filing separately. Most of you are probably familiar with the idea of a wealth tax on net worth. Let me tell you what this means. It means that if you receive a painting from your grandpa dies, and it turns out he has an old painting worth, $1 million, a wealth tax would mean they would charge you, so 0.4%, not necessarily that much, a couple $1,000. They would charge you this money that you don't have simply because the painting is worth something. So what if you don't have the cash, right? What they're really saying with the basic idea of a wealth tax is that your stocks, your metals, your hard assets, your car, for instance, all of these things are your wealth, and they're going to tax everything, and they liken it to a property tax. Now, I think there's a generally fair assessment in how, in the idea, but the idea doesn't make sense, right? Property tax is essentially you're connected to all these utilities and you're paying for the community. Some people have a problem with it. Yet you're essentially paying rent to the city. But if you own something and it becomes more valuable, all of a sudden you have to pay more money on it. Okay, listen, I think they're excluding real estate specifically because you already pay massive property taxes on it. But the general idea of what they're doing is substantially more insane than anything we've heard yet. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders have ranted about their wealth tax proposals, which in my opinion make no sense because if you have an asset, it doesn't mean you can actually pay for it. And so what ends up happening is, Jeff Bezos, for instance, does not have liquid assets in the hundreds of billions of dollars that they would claim. If he's ever lived in California, they're going to come for 0.4% of his net worth. He doesn't have that cash. I think that the news estimates that he maybe have in liquid assets, not necessarily cash, between $5 and $15 million, which would be like it would literally be impossible for him to pay for anything. So what do? Do they seize his stock in the company? That would destroy the company outright. Everybody would sell instantly, and the stock would become worthless. The idea makes literally no sense. But add on top that California will try and hunt you down 10 years after the fact. That's amazing. They're saying California is facing a big budget deficit because of the health and economic crisis brought on by the coronavirus, and we can't simply rely on austerity measures to close it, said Rob Bonta, a Democrat from Oakland, lead author of AB 2088. We must consider revenue generation. The state is horribly mismanaged. It's collapsing. Rolling blackouts are sweeping through some cities. People are talking about homeless everywhere, garbage piling up everywhere. People are being evicted. I think what's scary about that mass exodus, let me tell you something. They call this the exodus. I think the increase in inventory may be due to people being forced out of their homes. Now, I understand that many areas have implemented a moratorium on evictions. Doesn't mean people aren't leaving because they're being forced to do so. This is where things get scary. California is not going to, it can't sustain this. Their goal now is to try and tax people who left the state. That is terrifying desperation. You need to understand that this could lead to some very, very dramatic and dangerous consequences. Think about it. How will California enforce taxing Joe Rogan, for instance? Let's say they pass it. Let me read a little bit more. They say, he admitted that the union-sponsored bill will not be heard before the legislature adjourns August 31st, but it can be reintroduced on day one of the next session. Bonta said he would like to see a wealth tax passed in addition to the millionaire's tax proposed in a bill introduced in late July. AB 1253 would add surcharges of 1% to incomes, joint or single, between roughly 1 million and 2 million, 3% on income between 2 million and 5 million, and 3.5 on income greater than 5 million, bringing the top rate to 16.8. California's top rate today at 13.3% is already the highest in the nation. What did Cuomo say about New York? God forbid if the rich leave, desperately begging them to come back. And California's answer is, let's increase our state income tax to 16.8% and a wealth tax on hard assets for anybody who's lived here in the past 10 years. Let's see what happens. Joe Rogan moves to Texas. He's setting up a new studio there. He's making a ridiculous sum of money from Spotify. He begins paying taxes to the state of Texas. California says, actually, Joe Rogan owes us those taxes. Joe Rogan says, no, I don't. I don't live there, and you're not going to pass a law after I've already left. The state says otherwise. Let's see if California tries to send in state law enforcement or issues a warrant. Would Texas honor a warrant from California? Would the FBI? That to me is insane. I can't imagine it'd be constitutional that some other jurisdiction can impose a tax in a different state. Would Texas stand for that? And how would this conflict be resolved? Would California deploy their law enforcement in Texas to go after Joe Rogan for tax evasion, even though he doesn't live there? I think the answer is yes, I really do. They're facing a massive budget shortfall. They have rolling blackouts. They're becoming desperate. They need money. They need resources. They need to generate revenue, and I think they'll do it. We're talking about survival. I don't see them just backing down. Maybe they won't even pass this, mind you, for sure. They say this. Real estate would be exempt from the wealth tax because it's already subject to property tax at a higher rate. It's far easier to call for a state-level wealth tax than it is to actually design an enforceable one, said Jaron Walchak, a vice president with the Tax Foundation, a think tank. Maybe that's why no state has imposed one. Some New York legislators are floating the idea, but Governor Cuomo has poured cold water on the notion, rightly concerned that it would lead to an exodus of high net worth individuals from the state. Implementing a wealth tax at the state level would be extremely complex, with questions of how to value illiquid assets and whether residents' out-of-state wealth, including their investment holdings, can be taxed. He added, any tax that is actually effective at taxing wealth, however, would be equally effective at driving wealth out of the state. And that's the point. They are destroying everything and people are fleeing. And it's funny to see that, Joe Rogan, I use Joe because he's, the biggest podcast in the world. And people are pointing out he's moving. He posted an Instagram photo of his new studio. They say, the Hollywood scene used to be filled with Joe Rogans, free spirits who spoke their minds. Sure, liberals dominated the world of entertainment, but non-liberals, at least those who had already made it out or who possessed a certain level of moral courage, could and did speak out. The era of free speech has come to a close. He goes on to say, what exactly did Joe Rogan say that signaled his big move from Los Angeles to Texas? During a podcast conversation with guest Joe DeSena, Rogan said, I'm out of here. I'm going to go to Texas. I just want to go somewhere in the center of the country, somewhere it's easier to travel to both places, and somewhere where you have a little bit more freedom. While Rogan complained about LA's infamous traffic and population density, he also cited the area's economic despair and a homelessness problem that's accelerated radically over the last 6, 7, 10 years. Rogan isn't just griping. His comments are fundamentally a political critique of California's one-party governance by the increasingly far left. Yes, 100% correct. Los Angeles has tried to pass some kind of housing reform to end the homelessness problem, and they have failed every step of the way, even with a Democratic supermajority. The mismanagement has become real. Like I was saying with media, when the only thing you hear and the only thing you're allowed to say is the left-wing narrative, then nothing ever changes. No one will dare counter, say, the COVID narrative and the economic shutdown, because you'll get banned, you'll get silenced, you'll get mocked, you'll get ridiculed. On the right, you have people challenging some of the narratives of, say, Dr. Fauci. The left will not allow it. They will they will complain about a news organization covering a press conference of doctors. And then every social media company will ban those videos, even though the news company just filmed a press conference, and no one will hear otherwise. And thus, the economic shutdown will continue because it's the only thing anyone can hear about. No matter how many times I've said, starvation is coming, total collapse is coming, the mainstream media doesn't allow for these conversations. Some articles have popped up, but at the national level, these national reporters don't bring it up. So what happens? 15 days to slow the spread has turned into 6+ months, or around 6 months. And now the cities are just dissolving because we have cultural problems, absolute cultural problems. The Democrats in Los Angeles face a very similar problem. Because they're all diehard Democrats with no competition, they just keep going further and further left. Their policies, their plans make no sense. It just appeases the ideas of the people who they want to vote for them. And it becomes increasingly unhinged until the whole state is now in free fall. And their only option is to try and siphon money away from people who don't even live there anymore. I'd like to see how that plays out. A state like Texas, I can't imagine sending in their law enforcement saying you got a warrant in another state. The FBI would have to do it. I don't think the federal government's going to arrest someone because they tax evaded in a state. I mean, maybe they will. Maybe they'll say, hey, you got a warrant in this state. You cross state lines. I don't think California can enforce that. I really don't think so. And I think a judge would throw it out. Or maybe California will say, if you ever enter our state again, we have handcuffs with your name on it. The separation of the states. That's how crazy it would be. Keeping in mind, it's proposed. It's not actually being implemented. I'm just saying that's how crazy things are that they would even think about doing something like that. Take a look at this. Manhattan apartment rents plunge 10% in pandemic-fueled exodus. Here's another one. Leaving New York. Why you might see higher tax bills. CNBC says, coronavirus has spurred some people to flee large cities for second homes in different states. What may have started as a brief jaunt to a different location is looking more like a long-term arrangement as the pandemic approaches its 6th month. This raises potential tax consequences. States are becoming desperate for revenue, which means audit risk is up. They want their slice of your income. Oh yeah, baby. The wealthy are going to flee in panic. The tax base will erode because it's not even about the wealthy. It's about the middle class as well. Everyone's going to spread out far and wide, and we are going to see states like West Virginia, Montana, Idaho, Iowa, New Hampshire, smaller, more rural states with more freedom are going to see massive increases in population. And you know what? It's a good thing. But be warned. I mean, look, I'm about to get out of New Jersey. How long until New Jersey says, no way, you owe us money? No matter what, they're just going to try and milk and siphon more. Phil Murphy is a tyrant. the governor of New Jersey, as is Cuomo. New Jersey's particularly bad, mind you. So what? Are they going to allow all these businesses to flee? They're going to try and do something, I think. Otherwise, what happens? This is the end of many of these blue states. It is the end of many of these blue cities. And we're seeing it in real time. I can't imagine that with rolling blackouts now, people are comfortable and people are planning on staying. But I'll tell you what, man, some people can't move. But let me just say, with the riots, with the general unrest, with the mismanagement, we've seen the exodus in the pandemic. We've seen people talking about exodus. If a rolling blackout isn't enough for you to realize it will get worse, I don't know what to tell you. But let me just add the positive at the end of the story. It's about time we had people move out and start, bringing life into many of these more rural areas. I've been looking at some very rural areas. Surprisingly, you can get some good internet in the middle of the country. And a lot of these local jurisdictions need life. They need people. I think this will ultimately make us stronger. We've centralized too much in these cities. And so they say the night is always darkest before the dawn. So while we can look at these cities and we can shake our heads, you need to realize in the end, this may be a door closing and a window opening, in that the failed policies of these cities, which dictated at a national level because of population density and because the amount of Congress people centralized in these big cities, all of that's going to start going away. I think, we're going to face some trouble and it's going to look bad, but hopefully in the long run, a lot of people are going to flip their politics in a certain way. They're going to say no more of this broken, policy. They're going to go to rural areas and breathe life into these places that were losing population. We're going to see the emergence of new towns, new cities, new ideas. I think it will strengthen and end the cultural stagnation that we've seen for the longest time. I'm actually fairly, I'm excited. I am. I'm moving to a rural area. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited for the new adventure. I was in New York for a long time and it's boring. It became this big mess. Everybody wanted to be there, but it became generic and homogenized. It's about time we saw new businesses, new music, new movies, new culture, new games, new ideas. And this will happen when people spread out and go to separate, different rural areas. That can be the light at the end of this dark tunnel. I look forward to it, man. But you know what? The very last thing, I guess, is I think there's a wake-up call for a lot of people that these democratic policies have completely failed. And I think this is going to dramatically change how this government is run. So I'm fairly optimistic in terms of what comes after November. Mind you, I can talk about the negativity and the riots and all these things, but look further ahead. There's a positive coming from all of this. I am going to be in a rural area. Well water. Man, think about that. I've been on city water my whole life. Well, I was briefly on well water. We had uranium in it. That was kind of crazy. It was from farms. But I'm going to be in a rural area very soon. I'm super excited about it. I get to, fire a bow and arrow in the backyard, skate and do whatever I want. I have to worry about neighbors or anything like that. It actually sounds really exciting. And there's some local small towns and there's community. And it'll be really nice to actually have neighbors, to actually have a community and talk about community events. So I think this is a good thing. I really do. New York is set to lose a couple delegates, electoral college votes. They're set to lose 2 reps because of the census. I kind of think it's great. It'll help spread things out, and it'll help restore a lot of, individuality throughout this country. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at timcast.net, and I will see you all then.